Buongiorno a tutti. Excuse me please for delivering the presentation in English. It will be just a little bit faster and easier, but if you have any questions, then I'm sure that we can resolve them together if they should result from the language. I'm pleased to be here and to try and explain a little bit where we are currently with the implementation of the Directive 2010/63. The directive had three main aims when it was inaugurated in 2010: to bring a significant increase in animal welfare across the European countries, to create a level playing field for industry and academia. As those of you working in the field will well know, is that the national legislations that had transposed the previous directive had diverged so much from each other that research across European countries. Maybe because this is not that high, it might be easier if I sit down. Can you hear better this way? Yes. So it was one of the main aims to create a level playing field for industry and academia with this directive, which was not given before really. And we took the chance to introduce measures into the directive that should help to actively implement the principle of replacement, reduction and refinement as a legal obligation with this directive. So I would like to emphasize that it is not a nice to have, it is not a recommendation, it is a legal implementation to implement the 3 R's where methods exist. So the directive really applies in a very broad field of research. It applies to all the research programs that the European Commission is financing. It applies to testing of chemicals under REACH. It applies to the agricultural sector, to food safety, to cosmetics, pesticides, biocides, biological products, to testing for the environment, and last but not least at all, to testing for pharmaceuticals. So all these different sectors, all research, all scientific purposes that use animals fall under this directive. Publishing the directive, the Commission and players involved acknowledged that animals, including non-human primates, are still needed to some degree, at least today, for research and regulatory testing. The directive also firmly establishes that the ultimate goal is to replace the use of animals once sufficient alternative methods to reach the scientific goals are available. Animals do have intrinsic values that must be respected. And as I mentioned already in the first slide, the principle of 3 R's is established and enshrined in the directive, and not only for the welfare of animals that we insist on this principle, but there is also the conviction that the principle will help to move science along towards more humane and better science. I would like to quickly go over the key elements of the directive to just highlight the main examples. Authorization of establishments using animals and authorization of all projects that use them is a key feature of the directive, and it involves a systematic project evaluation by the responsible authority that includes scientific and ethical evaluation. And the directive also establishes binding standards for housing and care of animals, again active implementation of the 3 R's. It should lead to increased transparency and better enforcement if correctly transposed and implemented. And the directive established new structures for the validation and regulatory acceptance of alternatives. The establishment of the European Centre for Validation, ECVAM, is just one example. So new tools and obligations with the directive are the project evaluation and authorization, the animal welfare bodies in the different institutions and the national committees. The focus on competence within the directive is a new element as well. Not only does the directive mandate that personnel handling animals is sufficiently trained, an additional element that was brought in with this directive is the proof of competence. So to show in practice that the training has been delivered. And the fourth element are risk-based inspections, so inspections of establishments using animals on the basis of risk or of indications that some things could be improved. Where are we currently? The legal framework has been set out by the Commission. And as you well know, some of the transpositions took a bit longer than was foreseen in the directive. But meanwhile, we have made it, and all the member states have transposed the directive. The last country only in 2015, but now we're there. But unfortunately, that is only the beginning of a journey, because the transposition in national law is not yet the same as its implementation. The Commission very thoroughly is working to ensure correct, complete and timely transposition. That, I'm sure, is your expectation as a user community, such that the level playing fields, that was the aim of the directive, can really be achieved, and you can work in a reliable environment. And aside from that, it is even a legal requirement for us as a Commission based on the treaty to ensure that it is correctly and completely implemented in national legislation. So what we're doing to this end is to examine very thoroughly the completeness as well as the correctness of all the 28 transpositions. Where the transposition seems to be incomplete or incorrect, so-called pilot cases have been initiated. This means that the Commission looks at a group of member states together to ensure fair treatment as much as possible. And in a pilot case, the Commission sends out the observations that we had about the national transposition, saying we read your article in national legislation this way, and we have the impression that the original intent of the directive is met or is not met, and then the national authorities get a chance to respond to our observations. So that is what happened under the pilot cases, and with all the countries where we consider them necessary, those have been initiated meanwhile. Only if any divergences cannot be resolved in this interaction between the European Commission and the national authorities, then a formal infringement might follow, including a possibility of fines. And last but not least, we're not at this stage yet now, but later in 2018 and 19 there shall be implementation reports on the provisions of the directive. So because the pilot cases and the check of the implementation are still, of the transposition, are still ongoing at this point in time, I cannot comment any more specifically where the situation is regarding the Italian transposition. We are at the stage of the pilot cases. No formal infringement has been invoked yet, but because the process is ongoing, unfortunately, I cannot give you any more details. I'd like to spend a moment to emphasize that transposition is not yet the same as implementation of a directive. So let's have a look at implementation. What does it mean? First, I'd like to highlight that implementation of a directive is in all cases more cumbersome and more difficult than that of a regulation. Difference being with a regulation that the text that is published by the European Commission is applicable as such by the letter in all the countries. So for example, the chemicals legislation REACH is a regulation, and it describes very detailed that for certain type of testing, a industry partner needs to conduct exactly this test, OECD number XYZ, to fulfill a registration requirement. It is very prescriptive and there is no room for interpretation. In a directive, on the other side, it just gives a broader objective, a framework, and that the national member states then have some leeway of implementing in a way that is possible within the own country's structures. So that makes it a longer process involving the national legislative process, and the operational implementation and application then still needs to meet the original intent of the directive, and that's why it is a bit more cumbersome. So 28 member states already sound a lot. Unfortunately, though, many more member states have also still a federal structure inside their own country, leading to even more complex implementation. So one implementation in one country suddenly adds up to 28 national legislations, even more implementations in the different federal states or regions, and even more players are involved in the final application of the directive, so that is what makes our life a bit complex at this point in time. So we are still in this phase across the different countries. This slide highlights a few of the new bodies and tasks that have been introduced with the directive. So the animal welfare body is a new element, as well as the designated veterinarian, the named responsible person within an establishment. All these elements have to work together, have to be implemented in the right spirit to work as they were intended. So that is a process that is ongoing in all the member states at this point in time. So with implementation, we also really mean to reach all the final players, which includes dedicated personnel in the establishments, who all need to have clarity on the legal requirements, their exact role. So it involves a lot of training and a lot of checking on the competence. So at this point in time, to look at if you look at the legislative process on a time scale, I think we are at the moment in most countries at the application stage. And different member states obviously move through the process at different times, and we have not yet reached the status where we could say we have really good experience in how the provisions of the directive work. So this just a small animation to highlight to you again that in publishing a directive, it should leave the member states flexibility to bend where you need to be to implement the key principles of the directive following your own legislation. So you have the flexibility with the national legislation. However, for studying the transpositions in some countries, we also notice that the transposition and implementation can lead to unnecessary complications. We have some examples from the pilot cases that administrative processes are doubled, or that the national requirements are sometimes getting to a higher level of detail than what was initially envisaged by the directive, and that then complicates the application of the directive. To just pick on one example, that is easy. Educational requirements have in some member states been translated such that that really the hours of training to be completed need to be recorded. That to us seems an unnecessary complication. So there is a lot of learning to be shared or to be had still. Challenges of the new directive. Coherent understanding and interpretation is certainly one of them still. Available resources within the ministries, other responsible administration, and the users, another one. The existing infrastructures and practices that have to adapt to the new requirements to the directive are certainly also a challenge in some. And a change in mindset. Both for the obligation to apply alternative methods where they already are available and delivers satisfactory results, as well as for the transparency of the evaluation. And last but not least, the goal of the directive, and at the same time a challenge, is that it should really lead to a self-motivated application of the concepts, of the rules within the directive, and the concept of culture of care is a concept of mindset of personnel handling animals and handling projects altogether. Culture of care is what we would like to advocate in all the guidance and all the help that we provide on the directive. Of course, that requires buy-in and commitment from all. On the positive side, the directive also has quite a number of opportunities. We find at least increased animal welfare should certainly be guaranteed. Improved science should be the result of new approaches, of more appropriate animal models, of more appropriate application and use of animal models through improved study design, and from reduced stress to reduced variability of the results at the end of it. More efficient use of resources should hopefully just be an effect on the side of this. We also hope that the new directive would help create business opportunities on the side of alternative technologies, and would help to increase public confidence through improved transparency, and I think an event like this today will certainly also contribute to that. Last but not least, also for personnel working with animals, increased self-esteem, increased positive perception and professional pride about the work they do in administering the best possible care to animals that are still used today, I think should be again an opportunity by the directive. So where are we today implementing it? Busy working together, I guess, is the status. We are working together as a Commission with all Member States and stakeholder organizations to promote a coherent implementation. We have at least twice yearly Member State meetings of the designated national contact points for the directive. As a matter of fact, tomorrow and day after is another such meeting in Brussels. There have been many expert groups who have met on key topics. Yes, that's what I just mentioned. The NCP meetings help Member States with all the legal and technical application questions and issues that have been encountered in the implementation of the directive. And the expert working groups have developed a lot of guidance around the directive that is available on the information portal of the Commission website. So the guidance documents are a common framework or approach on topics like the severity assessment, that is a new element under the directive, on the role of the animal welfare bodies, on education and training, Also on project evaluation, there is a guidance document available that should all recommend best practice and optimum processes. These guidance documents that I just want to show you here, that you recognize them if you do access our website. They have been translated in all the official languages of the European Union, so you can definitely download them in Italian as well from our website. And yeah, we hope that they are useful to all the users under the directive. So I think I've already used enough of your time. I'd like to conclude by the observation that the implementation is still ongoing and is certainly still requiring work in the process. But the consistency that is needed while respecting different structures is an area that we focus on a lot and help and try to help where we can through common guidance and tools, and through fostering collaboration across all stakeholder groups involved. So with that, I'd like to thank you at this stage, and if there are any questions later, I would be happy to try and answer them.